Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, business, education, whatever gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined as always by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing fine, Jesse. I'm in studio at Barbarian Productions, but you are remote.
I am remote. I'm up here visiting my parents in lovely Western New York, where it is gray and rainy and in the 50s. Did I say lovely? Anyway, that's where I'm calling from. Hope things are maybe a little more pleasant down there. I know you all have had some serious weather this week.
Yeah, we had some serious rain, although now, today, this is Friday when we're taping this, it's absolutely gorgeous. So.
Well, good. Glad to hear it, because I will be returning there. So keep it nice for me. I'll be back soon.
I'll do my best.
We have quite a few things to talk about this week. Actually, the school board heard an update on that somewhat complex reading retention law that you may remember from last year. It is still in effect, and it's even more complicated this year. We'll talk about that a little bit. A lot of budget talk. We had proposed budgets from Knox County government, from the University of Tennessee's Knoxville campus, and also a look at the city of Knoxville's capital plan for the upcoming year. So altogether, we're going to be talking about a couple of $1 billion in spending here, probably, give or take $100 million here or there. But to start out, I thought we would talk again. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but about this whole issue of whether or not local school districts in Tennessee want to allow teachers and other staff to carry concealed weapons at school. So, as you may recall, this is the result of a new state law that just passed, and it is essentially giving school systems the option, if they want to allow teachers and other staff who undergo specific kinds of training and pass background checks and so forth, to carry concealed handguns in the classroom, in school hallways. There are some restrictions in the law about where exactly they could carry those weapons, but the idea, as stated by the proponents of it, and of course this passed out of the Republican supermajority in the legislature, with the Democrats in the legislature opposed to it, but the Republicans who pushed for it said that, look, this gives an option to maybe smaller rural districts that might not have the resources to have, full-time armed security guards in their school buildings, and it could just be one more sort of safety backup in the event of something terrible happening, like somebody coming in looking to shoot up a school. When the law passed it and got a fair amount of media coverage, there was a pretty widespread negative reaction to it, certainly in Knox County and in a lot of the other metro areas in the state where we already have armed security in all of our schools in Knox County. We have school security officers employed by the school district, but also under agreement with the Knoxville Police Department and the Knox County Sheriff's Office, there are armed deputies and armed officers in many of the schools as well. And so school board members here have reported mostly receiving feedback from parents and from staff saying, please don't do this. Partly because people say, we don't need it. We already have armed security in the schools. And partly because of the way the law is written, it would make it confidential if anybody was actually doing this, so that if the district decided to do it, and this requires the sign off of the superintendent and the local law enforcement agencies to allow this, but if they decided to do it, there would be no way for anybody in the public to know who was carrying, which particular teachers or staff, or even what buildings they were in. And so there would effectively be no way for a parent to know if their child was going to school in a classroom with a teacher who was walking around with a gun, or a building where, teachers or custodians or cafeteria workers or whoever were also going armed. And we had 2 resolutions proposed by school board members. And kind of crucially, one of those resolutions came from a Republican member of the board and one from a Democratic member of the board. The Republican is Christy Christie. The Democrat is Catherine Bike. They were pretty similar resolutions, but they had some key small differences. Both of them basically said, we've invested a lot in security. We trust the security systems that we have in place. And they were both written with the evident intent to say that, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow teachers to go armed. Superintendent John Ryswick has also come out and said that he doesn't think there's a need for this in Knox County, again, because of the security that they already have in place. What it really came down to was how strong a statement the school board wanted to make about this. And they debated this at their work session on Monday and then voted on it at their monthly meeting on Thursday. And to make a long story short, they ended up approving the resolution that Christy Christie had put forth, which kind of just outlines, here's all the things we're already doing about security. And then it has a phrase that says that school security officers and law enforcement officers will continue to be the armed personnel in Knox County schools. And that's just kind of where it leaves it. Bike's resolution, well, she started out with a much stronger resolution that actually stated outright opposition to the state law, said we're opposed to this law, and then said that we are not going to do this. We are not going to arm teachers and other non-security staff. That got reworked a little bit by Thursday's meeting with help from board member Jennifer Owen, and it ended up being pretty close to Christie's resolution, except that it had the more explicit statement that the current security officers and law enforcement officers will be the only armed personnel in Knox County schools. And Christie's resolution does not have that word only in it. It just says that they will continue to be the armed personnel. And that turned out to be kind of a big sticking point. At Thursday's meeting, board member John Butler, who's one of the Democrats on the school board, made a motion to amend Christie's resolution to say, to really just add that word only, to say that they will be the only officers in school. And Christie basically said, look, this resolution, as I've written it, is designed to get the most votes possible on the school board. It is a partisan board with a fairly significant partisan divide that shows up especially around these kinds of hot button issues. Right now it has 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 2 independents. And when we come to these partisan divisions, it's often that 5-member Republican majority, on one side and the other 4 on the other side. And that was kind of the situation here, except at Thursday's meeting, one of the 5 Republicans, Vice Chair Steve Triplett, was not there. So you had the 4 Republicans. But on that on that amendment that Butler offered to add the word only, that's how the vote came down. The 4 Republicans were against adding the word only, and the other 4 were in favor of adding it. And, I think it was just a reflection of how hard it is for this board right now, especially, and it's not that the school board didn't have 5-4 votes before it became a partisan body a few years ago. They did. But the partisan nature of the board now has kind of heightened that tendency to split on, culture, political type issues. And, the interesting thing was the 4 Republicans didn't quite say exactly why they were against adding the word only. Christie just basically said, look, the wording that I have in here is wording I've talked with our local law enforcement about, and they're comfortable with it. And kind of implicitly what she was saying was, I think this is wording that can actually get a majority of votes on the school board. I think that's really what she meant. And recognizing that Bike's initial resolution, which stated opposition to the law, was going to have a hard time passing because now that we have an explicitly Republican majority on the board, several of them have shown real reluctance to really criticize the state legislature in any way, because the state legislature, of course, is Republican dominated. This is a shift on the school board. As recently as 5 or 6 years ago, our school board felt perfectly free to routinely take stands in opposition to things the state legislature was doing. And that has really changed with now that we have a more explicitly partisan board. I think that was part of the reason probably that the Republican supermajority in the legislature made the shift back to partisan school board elections. They wanted to see a little bit more obedience from the local rank and file. And I think that's honestly the effect that we're seeing here. But the kind of crucial part of this discussion on Thursday was when, after Butler tried to insert that word only and was rebuffed, he just kind of point blank asked Christie, well, does the resolution that you're offering mean that we're not going to arm teachers? Like, is that your intent? Even though you didn't want to put the word only in there. And she said, yes, that's the intent. The intent is that we stick with what we have. And so Butler and most of the rest of the non-Republican part of the board said, okay, if that's what we're saying, then we're good with that. It passed on a 7-0 vote with Bike abstaining on it because she did think that the stronger language was warranted. So that kind of leaves us, it leaves us with a somewhat clear statement, I guess. I mean, Scott, how do you interpret that reluctance to say that these are going to be the only people armed, but then also the sponsor of the resolution saying, well, yeah, that's what I mean. I just don't want to quite put that word in there.
Well, whenever you're dealing with things like this, the words you leave in matter and the words you leave out matter. However, one thing I think is the way that she's probably rationalizing this as far as the wording goes is it does say they will be the armed personnel in the school system, the law enforcement officers. Well, they didn't say a, they said the, so it's not as strong, but I think that it would still hold up as a, but it is a little more open to interpretation. So, there is some ambiguity in there that just going in and reading it without knowing the background on it, you might go, well, the door's open, but I think that it probably is not really open. It might be unlocked, but it's not really open, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way to look at it. And, it's also unclear under this law whether anything the board says has any real enforceable effect, because the law only says that the superintendent and the local law enforcement agencies would have to approve any staff who wanted to go armed, who met all of the training and other requirements. It doesn't say anything about school boards. And there was some discussion about that. Like, does the board have any say here? And what Gary Dupler, the deputy county law director who's assigned to the school board, said was that in his reading, he said it actually is unclear exactly where the authority lies, but also the school board, of course, is free to make any statement it wants. And one would assume that since Ryswick, the superintendent, does work directly for the school board, he's going to be attentive to their expressed desires as he interprets them. And of course, he was there through all of this discussion, so he got to hear what everybody said and what they said about what they meant. Plus, also, of course, he has already said himself that he doesn't think they need to do this. It seems like, if you're a parent looking for assurance that your kid is not going to be in a kindergarten classroom with an armed teacher, you can be pretty confident.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that you get back to, the school board can set policy. They might not have the authority to allow guns or disallow guns directly, but they set policy and the superintendent follows their policies. I mean, that is the, tantamount to ordering him to not allow any teachers or staff to carry firearms.
Yeah, right. It does have that appearance. Plus, also, he doesn't seem inclined to want to do it himself anyway. And then there's also the whole issue that even in the situation where a district decided to allow this, very unclear how many, if any, school employees would want to do it, because there are, training requirements and background checks you have to go through. Plus, also, the law says explicitly that neither the school system nor the law enforcement agencies would have any liability for any employee who was going armed, which means that you don't get any extra pay or anything for doing this. And you would also be taking upon yourself, presumably, significant financial liability if you had a gun in school and something went wrong. So it's a little hard to see that there would be a lot of adoption of it anyway. But anyway, that's where this has all been left for now, and probably where it's going to remain left unless it gets raised again, by somebody for some reason. And probably everybody will go back to just kind of assuming that teachers are not carrying guns in school, unless it's demonstrated otherwise. Okay, well, let's talk about budgets. We've had this is the budget time of year, as we've talked about. We talked about the proposed City of Knoxville budget. We've talked about the proposed Knox County Schools budget, and we had some more proposed budgets come through the pipeline over the last week. Scott, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville Chancellor Dondi Plowman presented the proposed budget for UTK, and a couple of interesting things in there. What's up with them?
Well, yeah, the Campus Advisory Board met a week ago Friday. They meet a couple times a year. They met and they have to approve the budget before it goes to the Board of Trustees in the summer for final approval. But Plowman proposed a $2.2 billion budget. UT is a big operation, lots of money flowing through there, coming from a variety of sources, but that's about a more than 13% increase in the budget, and it really doesn't contain huge initiatives other than the ones they normally undertake. But one of the things that it does is it's going to require a tuition increase. For the past 4 years, UT has avoided tuition increases. You could graduate. Some people who are graduating next week will have gone, if they've graduated in 4 years, they will have gone to UT for the same amount of money every year, at least tuition-wise.
That's during a period of very high inflation. It's worth noting.
Right. Well, I was about to get there. One of the things that they talked about was it's called the Higher Education Price Index. It's basically the inflation rate for higher education. And it's been going up an average of 3.5% a year. So over the past 4 years, it's gone up 14% or so. This is going to be at an almost 14% tuition budget increase this year, and so but the tuition is going to go up. It's only going up for undergraduates and a couple of graduates. Most graduate students, law school students, no tuition increase. In-state students, undergraduate students, will see a 2% increase. Out-of-state undergraduate students will see a 4% increase. Also, some 3 of the mandatory fees are going up, so there's a little, so that everybody will still pay a little bit more, but the tuition will stay pretty much the same for everybody except undergraduate students. So there was a lot of talk about that. UT, went through several years where they had much larger tuition increases across the board, but then, like I said, for the last 4 years they've kind of held the line. They were, COVID helped keep that down, but they're having to do that, and there wasn't a lot of pushback from advisory board members. I think that they just kind of said, "Well, we haven't had to raise tuition in the last 4 years, so it's about time." So they did that. They passed it unanimously. Like I said, very little discussion among the advisory board members. There was a presentation about the budget, and they listened. They asked a couple of questions about that, and that was about it. So. The bigger news, actually, for the thing that's going to change student life more than that, is they're going to be, beginning next fall, they're going to completely change the way they do parking on campus. And I don't know if people realize what a big change this is going to end up being. Currently, the big change is primarily for students and visitors, but primarily the students. Right now, you get permits on a first come, first served basis. And you just go get a student permit. It's the same wherever you go. I mean, there's a commuter permit. There's an on-campus student permit. And you go wherever, you just go, and if you get there first, you get one. It doesn't matter if you're a freshman or a senior or a graduate student. That's changing. They're going to distribute the student parking permits based on your academic progress, which means priority goes to graduate students, and then to seniors, and then to juniors, and down finally to freshmen are at the bottom of the totem pole. Now, freshmen have to live on campus. They're allowed to drive their cars on campus, but UT is really trying to discourage freshmen from bringing cars. That's one of the big changes. The other change, and this is going to take some getting used to, I think, for a lot of people, is they're going to have different rates, different permits, different rates for parking lots and garages in different parts of campus. They're dividing campus into 3 areas. There's the core area, and these will be parking spaces in the middle of campus. The ones that are the most desirable, because you can park there and go anywhere, and it's not too long of a walk to get wherever you need to go. Those will be the most expensive spots. Then there are the intermediate lots that are a little bit further out, and they have their own rate. And then they have remote lots. And those are on the edge of campus or even some cases off campus. And they're going to be the cheapest, but they're also going to be served by transit. Their goal is to have the T-Line, their transit service, run every 10 minutes to those lots during the day. But it's coming with a hefty price tag. If you're a commuter student, the core spots will be $390, and that's for a year, and that's almost double, 97% increase. The intermediate lots are $250. The remote lots are $198. If you live on campus, you're only allowed in the core spots where it's going to be $450, and in the remote spots where it's $310. So they're really trying to encourage students to park on the edges of campus and use transit to get into the core areas or the other areas of campus. So, there's no increase or really change for faculty or staff. They're also going to be devoting more parking spaces for visitors and making those more visible, so that when you go to campus, if you're a visitor, you're not just bewildered wherever you go. They're going to try to have better, signage and wayfinding methods, and they're also going to have spots on campus where you can drive up and pay remotely, and you don't have to have a permit necessarily. And that's basically for visitors, but I suppose anyone could, a commuter student could use one, I guess. But it's primarily for visitors, where there'll be these designated spaces, and you can go there, park, and pay right there, and you don't have to go get a temporary permit. So, but that's going to really change student life on the Hill.
Yeah, well, and it's worth noting that this is pretty common at a lot of universities. I mean,
Donnie Plowman's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when I was at Penn State 30 plus years ago now, you couldn't have a car. You couldn't have a car on campus until you were a junior. Like freshmen and sophomores just could not get parking permits on campus. Period.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Donnie Plowman said that when they looked at their these peer institutions, all these other schools, UT's the only one that did it that way. that didn't have priority parking for students who were further along in their academic career, and they're the only ones that didn't have premium spaces and not so premium spaces and different permit prices for each. So this basically does kind of put UT Knoxville back, or not back, but puts them in line with other schools. Now, still, it's going to be a big change.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting, you said that this will be a bigger change than the tuition, and I think you're exactly right. And it's partly because anybody who's dealt with public policy around parking can tell you that people take parking really personally and really seriously. And, my experience with that was when I worked for the city of Knoxville. I can tell you, we got a lot more pushback on raising the rates for street parking on Gay Street and enforcing the parking hours there than we did on raising property taxes. Like, people were way more upset about the possibility of getting a parking ticket, an $11 parking ticket on Gay Street, than a, $100 increase in their property tax bill. There is just something about, once you get in your car, you want to know that you'll be able to park when you get somewhere. It's a sort of, I don't know what the emotional, psychological resonance of it is exactly. But it is something that people can get very worked up about.
Yeah. Well, parking, if assuming you drive every day, parking is something you do every day. I mean, it's a part of your daily routine. You pay tuition once a semester, but you park every day, and you're right about people being upset. I know and this just happened recently. the city has conducted a comprehensive parking study. The results aren't out yet, but they're looking at everything. They're looking at the parking garages, the on-street spaces, commercials, where to put commercial spaces, where to do all these things, and how to do them. And everything's on the table, including the possibility of ending the free parking at night on weekends at city parking garages. Well, some folks took that to mean that they were definitely going to end that, and there was a big survey that somebody in the private sector put out saying the city's going to take away free parking. What do you think about that? Of course, everybody's going to be upset about it, but they were. That's something that people are very, very passionate about, and almost no matter what the city ends up doing, there will be pushback, as you well know.
Well, maybe some future episode we can track down somebody who can talk to us about the psychology of parking.
There you go. Well, a faculty member at UT, maybe we could go, and we'll be able to go. We could go interview them in person and be able to find a parking space because there will be more visitor parking spaces.
Let's hope. I will say, as a frequent visitor to the UT campus, greater availability of visitor parking would definitely be a benefit.
Absolutely. Now it's going to be steep, for people that, some of these, like the Vol Hall Garage on White Avenue is a place where the public can park. And, I've parked there several times. Boy, you don't want to stay there all day. I'll just say that it's real expensive.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we also had a budget proposal come from County Mayor Glenn Jacobs this past week, and there was nothing very surprising about this, partly because about 2/3 of the budget is the Knox County Schools budget, and we already knew what their proposal was. We talked about that before. They are clocking in around $683 million. The total county budget that Jacobs presented is $1.08 billion, which is a very large number. However, that is only up a little bit, about 3% from the current year's budget, which is at $1.05 billion. So about a $30 million increase in that budget. And most of that is already accounted for by the increase in the school budget, which largely comes from a combination of small, about a 3 to 4% increase in state funding, and then some projected increase in sales tax revenue. But that sales tax revenue in particular is the controlling thing for the overall county budget. They are projecting close to flat sales tax revenues for the coming year. And that's a big change from the last few years. People may remember coming out of the pandemic, we had a few years of double-digit growth in sales tax revenues between is the combination of the federal COVID relief funding that came through both the private and public sectors. There was just a lot of money kind of sloshing around for a couple of years, plus also the inflation that came on the back of it. And of course, when you get a lot of inflation and the actual sales price of items go up, you get more sales taxes out of that because it's just a percentage. But they have been seeing flattening revenues over the last few years. And this coming year, the always cautious and conservative County Chief Financial Officer Chris Caldwell is projecting a very tiny increase in sales taxes, which he says is the signals that they're getting from the state and from other economic indicators. And so apart from the increases in the school budget that we've already talked about, which are mostly going to pay for a new salary schedule that's going to give a lot of teachers up to like a 10% pay increase. But that aside, the rest of the county budget is barely moving at all. Jacobs is proposing a just a 2% raise for all other county employees separate from the school system. And that raise isn't going to kick in until halfway through the fiscal year, January 1st. So functionally, that's really a 1% raise in the budget. And, you know, we had an interesting question on our Compass Colloquy, our private Facebook group for subscribers, which you can join if you're a subscriber. And if you're not a subscriber, you can become one at CompassKnox.com. But somebody on there asked, well, we've had, you know, inflation of 3 to 4% still over the past year. Where is the county cutting in order to have such a small increase in the budget? And there's a couple places where there's some belt tightening going on, but they're not having, you know, any big staff cuts or anything. The real answer to that is that the cut is coming in people's salaries, because if inflation is, you know, 4 or 5% or 3 or 4%, and you're only getting a 1% increase, that effectively means that county employees, apart from the school system, are taking a functional pay cut going into this year. That's where the cut is, which probably people would rather have that than, you know, lose a job. But still, it does mean that for county employees, this is going to be at best a kind of static year. And, you know, probably in reality, it means that their pay is not going to keep up with inflation in the coming year. All that said, there are really no surprises here. Hard to anticipate there being a lot of pushback. The place that you might expect to see pushback is from the Knox County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Tom Spangler has been very aggressive about looking for larger raises for his employees. I won't be surprised if the Sheriff's Office does come forward and push for a little bit more of a pay increase. But the reality is that we had huge increases in Sheriff's Department pay last year of about 12% for deputies and 20+% for corrections officers. Got starting pay for both of those positions up over $50,000 a year. And part of the deal in that was that Spangler did agree that for the, you know, next several years going forward, sheriff's officers would accept whatever increases the rest of the county is getting. I still won't be surprised if there isn't a push to try to get a little more, especially because in the proposed city budget that we talked about, pay for KPD officers is now going to leapfrog the sheriff's department and have starting pay of, I think, is it $54,000 a year
56.
that they'll be starting at now, Scott?
56.
56.
And one of the things that too, though, that someone in the city they didn't castigate me for it, but they said you need to mention this at some point, is that while starting pay for city officers under the current rate is lower than the sheriff's office and a lot of every other agency around, the longer you stay, the better it becomes, and they pay more for the more experienced officers than other agencies do. You need to emphasize that. So, well, you know, it's interesting, but now the starting pay is going to be higher, and the raises in the city are for the rank and file officers, not the, you know, management and all. Although management, they're getting step raises anyway, but they're not getting the base pay increase that the rank and file officers are. Anyway.
Yeah, well, and of course, we get into a little bit of an arms race situation here between our local law enforcement agencies, where every time one of them goes up, like the sheriff's office did last year, then KPD comes back and makes the case to the mayor and city council saying, hey, we got to compete with the sheriff's office. We need to be paid more than them. And so they go up. And so the sheriff's office, I'm sure, would make the case that they need to try to keep up as well. But I think that given the huge raise they got last year and their agreement with Jacobs that, you know, they won't push, at least in the near future, Spangler's got 2 more years in office, probably there won't be a lot of fighting over that.
Maybe not. You know, the one big thing is, and this is true for all law enforcement agencies almost everywhere in the country, is they can't fill their positions. One of the arguments that the the KPD used, that Chief Noel used, and Mayor Kincannon agreed, obviously, and is as mentioned, is that their KPD's authorized staff of sworn police officers is 415. They have 350 on staff right now. And so that's what, 65 that open positions, and another 70 officers are eligible to retire this year.
Right.
And can go tomorrow and retire. So it's and so these law enforcement agencies are really competing with each other for the finite pool of people who want to be and are have the temperament to be police officers. So.
Yep. Well, there may be some discussion of that when this budget comes to County Commission for consideration later this month, starting next week. We'll talk about that a little bit later in our preview of the coming week. But for now, let's also talk about, like I said, we have already talked about the proposed city budget, the overall budget. But Scott, this week there was some more detail presented at Planning Commission of the city's capital improvement plans, which are their big infrastructure investments and those kinds of things planned for the coming year. So what's on that menu?
Yeah, the charter requires that the Planning Commission sign off on what's called the capital improvements plan. It's a 6-year look at these big ticket, long-term, usually infrastructure projects that the city is going to be paying for. And it includes the proposed fiscal year next year, and that's detailed, and that's part of the budget itself. And then for the next 5 years, it's kind of, this is what we're planning to do. It's not a commitment, but you know, they do that for planning purposes. Planning Commission just approved it without discussion. It wasn't a big deal. But for those who are interested, it's there's for next year, there's $43.3 million in the capital improvements plan. It's a lot of these are routine things. The biggest item is paving at $10 million, and so you know, almost a quarter of the budget's going to be paving. Then there's several other projects that are getting some big dollars. One is transforming Western, the project that KCDC has started to transform, as it says, the Western Heights housing project in North Knoxville and the surrounding Beaumont community. It's already underway. The city's been spending a lot of money on infrastructure, and also they're going to be spending $4.2 million this year, but they're also spending $4.2 million next year and the year after that and the year after that. That's in the capital improvements program. But for next year's budget, it's going to be $4.2 million. They're also going to be spending $3 million for the Burlington Fire Station they're building, and then $3 million for public space improvements around the new stadium, and then a couple million in Lakeshore Park for improvements there. So those are some of the big ticket items that are in the capital improvements plan. The capital improvements project, again, the forecast doesn't include any huge new projects. The Sunsphere, or not the Sunsphere, the Tennessee Amphitheater is going to get a $4.1 million roof. So, but that's probably, most of that's going to happen next year. So, but anyway, that's the capital plan. It's part of the budget. So when City Council considers the budget on second reading later this month, that'll be part of that. And that's one of those things that rarely gets changed or even asked to change, because because those are big long-term projects that the city staff looks at, and not just, it's not as easy as saying, oh, I only want to spend $3 million on the Sun Sphere or the Tennessee Amphitheater. No, you're going to do it. You got to spend off $4.1 million. So.
Well, and that paving budget, the $10 million, if people are curious about whether their local roads and streets are going to get paved, you can look that up, right, and see which particular streets are actually planned for this coming year.
Yeah, the city at their website, which is knoxvilletn.gov, but they have they have a schedule they go by. Certain roads, depending on the type of road it is, whether it's a connector or whatever, a neighborhood street or whatever, they get paved on different intervals of years. The neighborhood streets get paved much more seldom than Kingston Pike, or not Kingston Pike. Kingston Pike's a state road, but then some of the heavier used streets in the city. So, but yeah, you can go and check that out and see if your street is on the paving schedule for the next year.
Right. Okay. Well, the one other thing I wanted to mention from this past week, going back to the school board, they also had a presentation from Aaron Phillips, who's their executive director of learning and literacy, about the state reading retention law. We talked about this a lot last year, which was the first year it really took effect. And people may remember this is a law that was passed, I think, in 2021 that aims to, the intent of it is to make sure that students coming out of third grade have adequate reading and literacy skills to then be able to be, effective learners in fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, et cetera, going forward. Because there's a lot of data out there about if students aren't strong readers by the end of third grade, then they fall farther and farther behind in each subsequent year as the academic demands get more rigorous. This has been latched onto a little bit, I think, as almost like a magic mantra by a lot of people, like, oh, third grade is where we have to do it. And there's been some subsequent pushback against that idea, with a lot of people saying, honestly, like third grade is an important kind of measuring point. But if you want to really address children who have literacy challenges, you have to start earlier than third grade. You really need to invest, starting in pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, first, second, and that just kind of choosing third grade as this like magic point where everything has to happen is kind of an artificial way to look at it. Nevertheless, that's what the legislature did. And that law, it remains in effect, obviously. So this year's third graders are facing it as well. If they don't score proficient, meaning that they meet or exceed grade level literacy expectations coming out of third grade, then there are various remediation steps that kick in. The strongest one, the most punitive one, arguably, is that they could be just held back in third grade. If they don't want to be held back, then depending on where exactly they score in that below proficient range, they either have to do an intensive summer learning camp or year-long tutoring in fourth grade, or both if their score is low enough. And the reason that this was produced so much angst last year is that actually only about just over 40% of third graders, both statewide and in Knox County, score proficient or above. So you're talking about a majority of students, like nearly 60% of students theoretically affected by this. But then out of that group, more or less half of them end up being exempted for various reasons. Students with learning disabilities that affect their reading abilities, students who are English language learners, immigrant or refugee students who are still learning the language. There are a number of exemptions. So the impact is somewhat smaller, but still last year, about 30% of Knox County third graders were affected by this and had to do one or the other of these measures. That will remain true this year, although the state did add in one new way that you can appeal that decision, essentially, and that has to do with if you score adequately on a separate springtime reading screener test, you can appeal and you essentially be exempted and go on to fourth grade without having to do all of these other steps. But the other thing that's kicking in this year is that, so for those students who were affected in third grade last year and came out of third grade with a low score and had to go to summer camp or had to do the year-long tutoring in fourth grade, there is a requirement in the law that those students in fourth grade on the TCAP, the state reading test, have to show quote unquote adequate growth in order to proceed to fifth grade. So in Knox County, that shakes out to there's like just over 900 current fourth graders who are kind of on the hook of having to show that adequate growth, or they could be held back in fourth grade. And one of the big questions about this was, what did the law mean by adequate growth? Because the law didn't actually say that, and it left it up to the State Board of Education to sort out. The State Board of Education came out with a fairly complex and convoluted equation for calculating whether a student has shown adequate growth. It's not something that any student or parent is going to be able to figure out on their own. They're just going to have to wait for somebody to crunch the numbers and tell them. But then the legislature did add another, because the law didn't really say anything about what happens if you don't meet adequate growth, except that you would be held back. There was no obvious way around that. So they did come in and add another layer of remediation here, which is basically that if a student does not show adequate, first of all, if they show adequate growth, then great, you just go on to fifth grade and that's that. If they don't show adequate growth, then there can be a conference held between students' English teacher, their principal, the parents. They can all get together and agree and say, okay, we will agree to do still more tutoring in fifth grade, and then they'll be able to go on, which would probably be the option that most families would choose rather than having a student held back for a year. One thing about this is all of this is going to have to happen really quickly. This is all going to happen in like the next 2 weeks. The school system is expecting to get this year's reading results for third graders and fourth graders back on May 20th, which is just like 3 days before the end of the school year. And so then they're going to have to turn around and notify all of those affected families like immediately. For the third grade students, then the third grade students who don't meet the proficiency standard, they will have an opportunity on May 22nd or 23rd. So you get like notified probably like in the evening of May 20th, and then you have to turn around, and May 22nd and 23rd are the literal last days of the school year. And so your third grader who is maybe already thinking about summer vacation could suddenly get hit with, oh, you have to take a TCAP again. Or you can take a TCAP again if you want to. So that's one level of notification. But then also the fourth grade students who are affected by this are going to have to be notified that week. They're going to have those meetings, talk about what's happening in fifth grade. So for, some significant subset of third and fourth grade parents right now, they can't do anything except sit around and wait. Wait to get notification, wait to take these very quick steps. For the third graders, that might mean that they're going to have, if they, retake the test and still don't score proficient, they're going to have to turn around and immediately start summer school, which starts like the week after school ends. So they will functionally just not have a summer break until the end of June. But they won't know that for another week or so. So that's where we are with that law. There has been a fair amount of concern still expressed about this law, even at the state level. The State Board of Education actually passed a resolution, very unusual for them, asking the legislature to take yet another look at this and really consider whether what the state needs to do is spend more time and money and investment in those early years, the pre-K, K1, 2 grades before they get to third grade, that's actually a better place to try to address this than try to deal with it when students are already, somewhat well along. And where, if they do need to be held back a year, it's developmentally less of an issue a lot of times for kids to be held back in kindergarten or first grade than in third or fourth grade. So, I think we'll continue to hear some discussion of this year after year. And also, of course, people are going to just be looking at whether all of this has any real impact on student performance, whether we see those third grade proficiency levels actually increase year after year. They did go up statewide last year. We'll see what happens this year. But I think this is going to just continue to be one of these things that produces a lot of angst for third grade families in particular, and then for a significant group of fourth grade families. It's now just kind of built into how we are running our Tennessee schools, and parents and students are just going to have to live with it. So that's where we are on that. All right, I think we can look ahead to the coming week. Scott, we do have a few things coming up. County Commission will hold its monthly work session this coming Monday at 5 p.m. There's not a lot of really exciting stuff on that agenda. I think, honestly, the more interesting meeting on Monday is going to be their Finance Committee meeting Monday afternoon, where Chief Financial Officer Chris Caldwell is going to go over some elements of the budget and also talk about the county's debt service, which is an important and growing part of the county budget. And we'll be writing a bit about that next week. That Finance Committee meeting's at 2 p.m. in the main assembly room. It is followed then by the first actual public hearing on Jacob's proposed budget, which they're required to have. And that's scheduled for 3:30 p.m. in the main assembly room. And then followed by the County Commission work session at 5 p.m. There's also a beer board meeting in between there at 4 p.m. If you want to make a whole afternoon of County Commission meetings, you can do that on Monday and just kind of hang out there in the main assembly room, which frankly is what I'm planning to do. So come on down and join me. Then Scott, Tuesday, we have City Council, right?
Yes, City Council is going to meet. It's kind of, they've got kind of an odd agenda this time. Of course, they're not dealing with a budget this at this meeting. But they do have 31 separate ordinances dealing with rezonings and land use. Yeah, it's I saw that on the budget, and I went, oh man, that's crazy. But these are all items that have gone through the Planning Commission. They have most of them were overwhelmingly approved, if not unanimously approved. But the city has to pass ordinances on each one of them, and now some of these are, there are two or three or two, at least sometimes some of them have two ordinances per the property, but 31 total votes that they're going to have to do, and then they'll have to do it again 2 weeks from now on second reading. So these are all first reading rezonings, and then that's in addition to that, there are 2 appeals from decisions of the Planning Commission. So going to City Council on Tuesday will be much like going to Planning Commission. So it's all going to be about land use and rezoning. So and then later in the week, on Thursday at 8 a.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building, City Council is going to be holding their budget hearings. There's a public hearing as well. So that's like I said, it's 8 a.m. This is all questions about Mayor India Kincannon's proposed $461 million budget, and so they'll be hearing from department heads and asking questions of city staff, and then there'll be an opportunity for the public to weigh in as well. This is done then 2 weeks from Tuesday on May 28th will be second and final reading. Now, one thing that can happen is that after these budget hearings, city council members can craft amendments to the budget that they will consider on May 28th. So this is the last big chance for the budget to be hashed out in detail, and there is no end time to this meeting. So while you will be spending all Monday afternoon at the City County Building, I will be spending all of Thursday, possibly all of Thursday, in the same place with the City Council and the budget hearings.
All right. Well, we're going to be keeping those seats warm. Couple of things I should mention on the. There is one item on the county commission agenda that I think is kind of interesting that I forgot to mention, which is that they are considering a change, speaking of meetings, in their own meeting schedule that would take effect, I believe, in September, which is that they may actually, they're talking about getting rid of their monthly work session, like the one that's happening this week. Typically, right now what county commission does is they meet usually on the third Monday of every month for a work session to kind of talk through the agenda with the idea that, they can kind of hash things out before they actually get to the voting meeting the next Monday. And then they have that second voting meeting on the fourth Monday of the month. And what they're looking to do is just have the one county commission meeting where they would just talk through everything and vote on it right there. And the rationale behind this is that, several commissioners have said that, in fact, they tend to talk about things in detail at the work session and then do it again during the regular session. And if we're going to do this, why don't we just have one meeting? It could certainly make that one meeting longer. So that'll be the trade-off. There will be fewer meetings, but maybe one longer one. But then also what they're looking to do is break away the planning and zoning part of the meeting, because that is part of their monthly voting meeting right now, where they have to approve rezonings and so forth, and have that on a separate day, which, I think part of the thinking there is that for people who are concerned about zoning issues, a lot of times they end up coming to the regular meeting and sitting there for a while till the zoning meeting starts. But the other thing that happens is that they will have their regular meeting start at 5:00, and then the zoning meeting is scheduled. It's set for 7. If they don't finish everything on their regular agenda before they get to the zoning meeting, then they have to just pause, go through the whole zoning meeting and come back to their regular meeting, which means sometimes, and this happened the other week when they were talking about the new comprehensive land use plan, the actual most important item on the agenda that's attracting the most attention and having the longest conversation, they don't even get to till 8 or 9 o'clock sometimes, which did happen with that meeting. So I don't know exactly what impact all that'll have, but it looks like they are going to make those changes, and we'll see how that shakes out. The other point I wanted to make, you talked about all of those rezonings on the city council agenda. And of course, we've been talking about the tactic that pro-Palestinian protesters have been using at city council meetings, where they sign up to speak on literally every item on the agenda. I guess if they did that again this coming week and did that with all of those 31 items, and you add a couple of speakers to each of them, that could make for a pretty long night.
Yeah, and those are just the ordinances on first reading.
Right.
They also have, I didn't count the resolutions. They've got several resolutions, none of them earth-shattering or anything. They've got a couple of ordinances on second reading, and then, as I mentioned, you have those 2 appeals from the Board of Zoning Appeal, or from the Planning Commission decisions, and those tend to take a while too. And if those voices are added to this, then it's going to be. I'm thinking about just taking a pillow.
Yeah.
Thinking about
Yeah.
it.
Well, and of course, we don't know what the group of protesters that's been showing up is planning to do. But if they are looking for an opportunity to drag things out and make city officials sit around for a long time, this week definitely would give them that chance.
Would give them the opportunity.
Well, we will be back next week to talk about whatever happens at those meetings and anything else that happens in the interim. And I also plan to be back there in Knoxville next week. So we will see you all then. Thanks as always to Lord Seth Barber for his production work at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.